The question is, this is obviously a Netflix production, and it's coming out very shortly after it has its run in the cinemas. And it seems like a good collaboration at the moment between TV or internet companies with films, with the film industry. And there are of course some people who are naysayers. So what would you think, will we need to at some point redefine perhaps what is cinema?
Well, you're looking at me.
Let's not do that.
In such a way, I think it's not just an evolving of cinema, but it's a revolution. I mean, it's even bigger than the revolution that sound brought to cinema. It's the revolution of cinema itself, like 120 years ago, 115 years ago. It's a new, and we say the new technology, we bring in the things that are unimaginable, and how not only is it something extraordinarily good for narrative films, put it that way, narrative stories told with emphasizing motion picture images, but it opens up whole the original conception of what a film is and where it's to be seen has now changed so radically that we may have to say, okay, let's say there's a certain kind of film that's made here. There might be obviously virtual reality films, there's holograms, there's all sorts of things that are becoming that we really know. So in effect, one thing that will never, something that should always be protected as much as possible, and I think will always be there, is a communal experience. And I think that's best in a theater. Now, homes are becoming theaters too, but it's a major change. And I think one has to keep an open mind, you know. There's no doubt, like seeing a film with an audience is really, really important. There is a problem though, in that you have to make the film, and we run out of room, in a sense. There was no room for us to make this picture, and for many different reasons, I guess. And ultimately, there was a financial issue too, in terms of the CGI that we did. And the reason why we went to CGI is kind of complicated, because at a certain point, if I made the film earlier, they could have played younger, and then at a certain point we missed that. And then they said, well, use younger actors to play them younger. And I said, well, what's the point of that? And back and forth. And finally, CGI, we tried it and said, well, let's try. Let's see what the experiment. Open it up. I mean, CGI, to that extent, is really an evolution of makeup. Really. You know, you accept certain norms in makeup. You know that he's not that old, or she's not that young, but you accept that as a norm. I mean, you accept the illusion, so to speak. Taking that and having the backing of a company that says, you know, you will have no interference. You'll make this picture as you want. The trade-off is it streams with theatrical distribution prior to that. I figure that's the chance we take on this particular project, you know.
Well, yeah, the one point to add to what Marty said is that it will be in theaters, and even when it goes on platform,
right.
It still will continue to be in theaters. So audiences have their choice of whether they're going to watch it in theater and have an amazing cinema community experience, or they want to watch it on a platform. Roma, for example, is still in theaters around the world. Mm-hmm. So again, it's the audience has the choice of how they want to view something. And
Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America that starred Mr. De Niro was a film perhaps more similar to this one. Do you think that there are any references to that film here, in that it's a long film and not as perhaps action-packed as your earlier gangster films? Because I think your earlier gangster films were very different to this. Would you say that?
In this underworld milieu, yeah. I mean, well, I guess the similarity is it's very long and Bob is in it. but there was no way that I was thinking I was doing Sergio. There's no way. I can't do that. I just intuitively made the movie, and I told Bob, when we were trying to get the raise the finance, I said, I know how to do this. I said, I haven't thought. I know how to follow it through. And I just went with that.
But how is it different to your earlier gangster films, though?
How does it relate to them? Well, back in 1973, we were 29, 30 years old. Now, we're much older. And so we hope that maybe the vantage point of time, that something has evolved and maybe deepened to a certain extent about life, really. And if that could be conveyed in the story and the performances and the way the film is put together, and that would be some sort of advancement, rather than just replicating what we had done in the past.
What was the biggest challenge for each one of you on this movie? For you directing, for you playing your characters?
What was the biggest
Challenge.
Yeah, making the movie. That was the big challenge, yeah, because, I mean, in terms of Bob and Al, you guys, they're performing. Me, I can't speak for them, but for me, it's cutting through all the issues of how you perceive a story, the sweep of a story, what's essential to get and what isn't essential, and making those editing choices right there on set. First of all, even before shooting begins, to make those editing choices, and in shooting even tougher on those editing choices because it's a very complex picture, complex in terms of technology too. And staying close, staying on point in a way, staying on the what's essential to the story, and those are the characters, particularly Frank's character, and eliminating everything else around that was getting in the way. And this, I think, was a 108-day shoot. So this is something, and then in the editing too. So it's wrangling the picture in a way. They call it wrangling, and always threatening to run a little bit out of control, but grabbing it again, and using Frank Sheeran as the anchor for the whole picture until finally you wind up with him alone. And that's what it's all been about. I mean, that's just general about how you make a movie. Other ways, sometimes you make a movie, you don't know what you're going to do when you get there on the set. I tried that once, didn't work. For me, it didn't work. And I usually like planning and fighting my way through the whole process, until we get as best we can to the end result. But you guys with the character.
Yeah, and certain things with like Marty, we would, every so often I would come in to narrate pieces that Marty figured that we had to sort of voice over to give information or whatever, or sort of tighten something, whatever. And that's a normal part of making a movie. And this,
yeah, you even went into the audio tracks, the tracks of Frank Sheeran's actual voice,
yes,
stories, and every now and then we go and we pick you.
Yeah.
Tell me something, and so it's interesting, and we fool around with that and try to find time to shoot it in the film. I'd give it to Emma and tell her, could you find some production time, please?
I'd say yes.
Yeah.
Why do you think that we are constantly pulled back into talking about films about pain and trauma, and as in The Irishman, there's a lot on macro level with the president's assassination, etc., but it really does go into personal, individual pain. I was just wondering, why do you think that is?
Why do you think pain is important to storytelling?
Exactly.
Pain, suffering, that idea, what makes an interesting story? I mean, what do you think, guys?
well, I mean, this was a simple story. It was about a guy who was caught between two people who were powerful people, and one of them was disappeared. We never knew what happened to him, really, to this day. The other one was also Joe Gallo, referring to him. You still don't know who did that to him. It had that to hang on in some ways, this political, this grand story with these historical, if you want, type characters, and a simple story.
And also, Bob, in terms of that, when you're talking about these guys, and then on the other level, you have JFK, Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. You've got all this going on, and nobody knows really what happened there. And I always say, would it make any difference now if we knew exactly who, when, how, and where? No. The dark forces that take over, that are always present. And these guys are right in the middle of it, in a way. They just walk by the TV and there's missiles coming from Cuba. You know, so, and that's your afternoon lunch. You know, so yeah, I mean, that when you say the simple story, that was the thing, to hold on to the simplicity of it, because the rest is so complicated.